right. The super chill music is over. That means that it is time for the Data and API show. I am super excited to be with you again this week. I'm joined by Gavin, the AKA Smart One in the duo here today. And today we're going to be having a look at Vue 3.0. And fantastic because I know very little about Vue and all things Vue. So, Gavin, you know many things about Vue.
I like to think I know a bit about Vue. Been writing it since 2016, so I've written both Vue 2 and Vue 3. I'm a super huge Vue fan, so I'm pretty stoked any chance I get to talk about it.
Yeah, and I mean one of the things that we come across often with frameworks is it's typically the integration with the GraphQL side, right? Because there's any number of clients out there for connecting with React, with Vue, with Angular, with Vanilla, with Svelte. I'm not going to leave anybody out on purpose, but probably have. So when it comes to those integrations, they all kind of have their own flavor to some extent. And today we're not going over like the what is Azure stuff because we have content around that. We're going over how do you connect them? How do you connect these GraphQL clients to Vue? And we're basically going to watch you do like a Vue plus GraphQL 3 ways.
Yeah, we'll do that. If we have time, we can also talk about state management because it's the same problem. There's a couple of different ways you can manage state in Vue, and then we'll look at the new changes with like the script setup API, as well as like some tips and tricks you might not know for doing things like integrating JSX or TSX components as like helper utils. So with that said, let me share my screen. Okay. Then I'm going to pick my entire screen. And everybody can see my screen?
Indeed.
Sweet. So this is going to be kind of like a rehash of something that I did at Vue.js London. Because I already have a schema for this, and it's like simple enough to be a good talking point, but also realistic enough that it's not like completely silly. So basically, the app that we're going to look at today, the data model is like a really terrible meetup clone. So you have users, you have meetups, and users can sign up and comment on meetups. So we've already set that up here. So we have these tables created. If you go to like browse rows, there's already data in there. And additionally, we've kind of already set up the front end. So this is a like a Vite scaffolded app. And it just has a couple of routes. So the index page is empty. And we see that we have a couple of pages here named like Fetch, Apollo, Urkel, Villas, Zeus. And these are going to be kind of the pages where we go over how to integrate these things. So starting from Fetch, sort of the most like foolproof or like easiest way that you can grab data without pulling in external dependencies is you can just make a fetch call. That could be fetch on your back end, that could be fetch on your front end. But yeah, if you didn't know this, a GraphQL query is just a regular post operation to the GraphQL endpoint that has a query. Optionally, you can put variables in here if you have them. And then you can also put an operation name if you want to track it. But yeah, this is fundamentally kind of how GraphQL requests are designed to be made. And so that's what we're going to show. So we have a really simple component, which is basically has a loading state, it has an error state, and it has a data state. And this table component just takes in any arbitrary list of data and will display whatever rows and columns it has. So this is using the Vue 3 script setup API, which is really cool if you're not familiar with it. Generally, the way that you have to do this is you need to have like a defined component And inside of your defined component, you would have in Vue 3, you would have the setup function, right? And inside of the setup function would go all of your business logic for the component, any sort of lifecycle hooks, and then you would also define like props and components and stuff like this. So if you aren't familiar with it, what the script setup API allows you to do is it's somewhat inspired by Svelte, I think. Instead of defining these components and props and a setup function, it sort of automatically exports everything. So here you can see we have a state object that's reactive, and we have this like fetch data function. This state is just automatically exposed to our component without having to return anything. So it's very Svelte-like. In Svelte, you would have like, let name equals whatever, and then your component can automatically access this and it's reactive. So yeah, let's take a look at that. So we're just going to query all of our user records and grab, these fields, and then we're going to try to put them in a table. So that's our basic fetch. If we go back here and we go to the fetch endpoint, then you'll see that it's loading. Inspect it. We'll go to our network tab and we'll look at the GraphQL request. So yeah, essentially what you have here is you have a payload. So here's our query, and then it returns us the user's data. So we can see that that is essentially how you would interact with a GraphQL API using fetch in Vue 3. Now, let me see. Let's maybe make this do something that it shouldn't. So I'll put a field that doesn't exist there. Like there's no name on the user record. We're going to fire the request. We're going to await the result, and then we're just going to assign it to state. If there's an error, it'll also assign that to the errors. So if I put this here, then we should see there's an error. So basically, it's like that field name in the selection set does not exist on a user. So yeah, that's sort of a basic pattern for handling data using native browser fetch. And then let's sort of walk through some of the ones that might be more common. So we have two here that most people might be familiar with. We have an Apollo component, and we have one called Urkel, which is sort of like a slimmer version of Apollo. And let's talk about how you can set up Apollo in Vue. So there's only a couple of things that you need to get up and running from the basics, which is going to be sort of these imports. You need to import the Apollo client. You probably want an HTTP link. If you want to do subscriptions, you need a WebSocket link. If you don't want subscriptions, you don't need to import that. And you also you need the split, but only if you want to sort of do WebSockets as well. So the way that you set up an Apollo client in Vue is that you first want to create an HTTP link, which is what lets it talk to HTTP endpoints. So we'll say, okay, here's a link to our GraphQL endpoint. If you want to be able to do subscriptions, then you also need a WebSocket link, which is going to be the same thing, but you're going to want to pass these options, basically lazily connect. So only establish a connection once we actually try to do something, and also go ahead and try to automatically reconnect. And what you have to do if you want to be able to use both of those is that you basically have to tell Apollo, hey, whenever you make a query, I want you to check the query type. And if it's an operation definition, then I want you to use the HTTP link. Otherwise, if it's a subscription, I want you to use the WebSocket link. So this is essentially what this is saying. So it's like we're making some operation, and then we're splitting it literally based on the type, so that it's going to get routed either to HTTP or it's going to get routed to the WebSocket connector. So it's one or the other based on the operation. And then whichever one it comes through is just going to be it'll be one of these, and then you get your like final actual execution down here. So actually, I should probably make this only one because that's going to be confusing. But yeah. And then once you have all that set up, it's pretty straightforward. You basically create an instance of Apollo client, and you pass in your link. If you don't have a combined one, then this would just be like an HTTP link. So we could say we don't need subscriptions. I'll just take an HTTP link. And then for a cache, you can just tell it to use an in-memory cache. And in Vue 3, the way that you set up that instance so that you can use it is that you need to provide your app with this. So you give it the default Apollo client symbol, and you provide it with an instance of Apollo client. So that's the like rough setup. The other
and
thing
that's the only Vue part, right? Is just the app providing, because technically the rest of that could be just ported over to any framework using Apollo client, right?
Yeah. So basically everything except for this is all super generic. So these steps are the exact same thing you would do in React or like Svelte or Angular, and it's just this basically calling app.provide, where app is our Vue app, to give it the ability to use that client.
Nice. So you can just yank that from basically any existing project, and it's the connector paradigm, to be able to attach the splitting if it's a subscription versus a typical query coming in. So it's cool.
Yeah. Typically you would have in your like app.view, the other way that you would do this is you'd have like so look for Apollo here, and I'm going to minimize it. You would basically
wait. What was that? What was that button you just pushed?
Oh, collapse all.
Oh wow.
Yeah, super handy.
That's good to know.
Yeah. So what you won't see here is like in React, you'd have something like this, right? So you'd have like Apollo provider, and then you would be like client equals, client, and you would want to wrap your like root component in this sort of thing, right? And so basically what that code is doing with that app.provide is the same functionality as this. And I think you may be able to do it this way as well in Vue, but it's a little bit easier, I think, just to like provide it the same place that you were like instantiating it. So
does the app.provide act a little bit kind of like a higher order component sort of behavior? So it's doing a wrapping injection thing?
Exactly. Yeah, it's exactly like wrapping like your app root and the higher order component.
That's cool. Okay. Yeah. Are there any issues with, and I'm loose on this topic with React as well, when it comes to like order of wrapping, right? Because you could kind of have high order components wrapping high order components, and you would just get these beautiful chains. And then now you have basically just provider stacks, right? It's providers all the way down. Where is there any kind of a logic to follow, or is it just you have to look at what the providers are doing, and if it's something that a nested provider will probably need access to, like if it's a style library that's needing access to global state, then state should go above the style library? Or is there any kind of a pattern or a way to approach that to know when to bump up a level?
Yeah, so it's basically the same issue or like the same concerns that you have to account for in React when you're doing like providers. You need to handle those in Vue as well. So let me see if I can basically pull this up. Localhost 4000, and we'll go to like fetch. Let me do an inspect here. And so if we look at the Vue DevTools, you can basically see that we have this same sort of like provider tree here. So we have like a top level app, and then we have a router view that's like a higher order component. This is the fetch and the table. So you basically have the same sort of thing when you're doing providers. They just won't be displayed here. So the order does matter when you're doing when you're calling app.provide, and you would want to like basically wrap them in the same order that you would if they were higher order components like this router view or like an Apollo provider in React. But
Okay.
yeah, super good question.
That's good. That's good to know. Sorry. Like I said, I'm a Vue noob.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's a super valid question.
For sure, a Vue noob.
Yeah, so if you have like a bunch of these, they're gonna get like wrapped in the same order as they would if it was like one and then like two. Basically, whatever order they come in here is the order that they're gonna get. So yeah, super solid question. Yeah, so we'll save that. And then as far as usage goes, we'll check out the Apollo page. So there's actually 2 examples that are shown here. So the first one is using like a regular just use subscription from Vue. And there's a second one, which is using a GraphQL code generator wrapper, which we can talk about in a second. But let me pull up this page, and we'll go to the Apollo one. And we see these 2 examples. So here's the first example, which uses a GraphQL type document node, and a second example, which uses GraphQL code generators Vue Apollo API. So basically, it's using this API. And I don't know that we'll have time to go into how to set up all of that, but we can talk about like the usage, and you'll see that they're pretty similar. So we're essentially doing the same thing here. This is a subscription, and this is a subscription as well. So you can see this using the WebSocket here. And let's pull this down. You can see this sort of start the connection, and it'll run the subscription. And then we have basically this data payload. So let me expand this. But yeah, it's really easy to just swap these out, whether you want like a query or a subscription. So if we were to like use query here and change this to like a query, and then pull in use query from the top, it should function basically identically, except that's generated. So we won't do that. But yeah, so this is essentially how you make queries with Apollo. And it's got basically like a loading, a result, an error state, and then an on result callback. And if we look at like usage patterns in other libraries, you'll see that they're mostly the same. So when we call use Urkel subscription, this one also has a data and error result. And the way that you set it up is pretty much identical to setting up Apollo. So you have like an Urkel client where you call create client. And then you need to do the same thing if you want to handle subscriptions, where you're basically like, if it's a subscription, you need to forward it. And basically, they call it like subscribing to it because it uses like a subscription pipeline on the front end as well, like actual reactive subscriptions, sort of like RxJS. And then you call app.use, which is similar to providing, except it's for like registration rather than like dynamic injection. And it's the same thing. So it's kind of interesting to look at like using libraries like Vilis and Urkel, and they all wind up being like fundamentally the same sort of pattern. And it's not so different with the Apollo client as well. The only like weird bit is that they have this split logic. So yeah, let's take a look at Urkel.
Which I have to say, it's really fun being in an international context with GraphQL. Quite often, how many people don't really get the Urkel reference?
Yeah, I've always wondered, was that like a throwback to the show, or was that?
I think so, but I'm not positive.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, fundamentally, a lot of these libraries are pretty much identical in terms of like usage patterns and setting them up. Um, so I think it's a really good way to illustrate, like, hey, I'm going to zoom out a little bit so I can pull these up like side by side. Um, but basically, pull this over here. If we look at these two, the usage between like views like Villas library and like Urkel, all these patterns are essentially the same. So that's a pretty useful tip. And then, yeah, a couple of other things to talk about. This is just more of like a general view tip, but something neat that you can do that you may not be aware of is I'm going to go to pages and I'm just going to create like a new TSX file. We'll just call this like something.tsx. And you can export JSX or TSX components and consume them from your regular view components. So you can imagine that if we had a bunch of things like a button that took some props and like a modal, a lot of these basically like really short components, it can be kind of tedious to do those in a single file component because you would need button.view and modal.view and something.view. So if I do that and I go into index, what we can do is then basically do an import, if I can get my cursor there, from something. And well, I want to complete this button modal something. And then we should be able to just render this here. So we'll call button modal and we'll do something. Okay, so save that. Hopefully it recompiles this. All right. And then we'll go back to the index page. I need to return these. And set the pragma to be JSX preserve. And then basically all right, so I'm going to comment these up for now. And basically pull those two out. And okay, you can absolutely do this. But yeah, it seems to not want to render. I can definitely see it in the index. But yeah, so you can absolutely do that. I've managed to screw it up somehow, but it's a useful tip that I like to use in my projects. Yeah. Another thing I guess we can talk about is sort of the differences between a standard component and like script setup. So typically you would do basically export default define component. And we'll call setup. and we will do like const name equals ref, and we will return name. And we will import define component from view. Okay, and then here we can be like p and get name. All right. And then let's go ahead and put like input dash model equals name, and we'll just say this like person. Okay, so that's typically the way that you would have to do that. I'm gonna go ahead and inspect that over here. Okay, so person, that's changing. With script setup, essentially what you can do is pull all of this out, pull this out, pull the return out, and what you're left with is just the name. And we'll reload that, and it still works. And to prove that, let's do something else, like const other equals ref other thing. And we could basically put that down here. Okay. So yeah, you can see that our index page has access to the person and the other thing, other ref, and we didn't have to do define component, or we didn't have to import ref at all, which is pretty cool. It also works for things like computeds. So we say like const other doubled, we can use computed and return other plus other. And because JS is weird, it'll let us just concat strings like that. And we can access other doubled. So now whenever other changes, then other doubled will. So instead, let's bind this to other in the V model. So you see it's repeated twice. And if I change it, then this is reactive, and the doubled version of it is reactive as well. And we get 5 plus 5 is 55 because that's how JavaScript works. Yeah, so script setup is super cool. I think it's technically still somewhat of like an RFC status, but it's really usable. And I would highly recommend checking it out if you haven't. The other thing that we can talk about, I guess, is things like suspense, which is new to Vue 3. So when you have async functions like this, like say in our fetch, where the data that we need is asynchronous and we can't really render it till we have it, the typical pattern that you would use is to basically say like, am I fetching? And then make your request. And then after you're done, say, I'm not fetching anymore, and set any errors. So there's nothing wrong with that. But the suspense component is basically, it's similar to or identical to like suspense in React, if you've worked with that. It's still considered experimental. But what suspense allows you to do is basically take anything that needs asynchronous data to render. So let's say we have a to-do list. And this to-do list has an async setup because it needs to load data from our API or read a file, right, JSON. With suspense, what you can do is basically have a parent component that wraps the async component, and you just give it templates for the fallback and the default state. So instead of needing to manually handle this, like, are we loading, are we errored, we can do something like that. So if I define an async component, let's just grab the one from here. That's fine. We'll just be like async. Do that. We'll do script n equals ts script, and we'll do template. So you can do this in the setup API as well. Basically, if you have asynchronous data, it'll get resolved. So if we do something like this, we do like so we'll just copy this async function fetch data. And then let's not do this. Let's not change the state. Let's import that. Also not change the state. We'll console.log this, and we won't do anything finally. Okay, and then so if we basically do const data is a ref to an empty array, and we will say that data.value is equal to the request's JSON. We can remove this out of the function, the async function, and because of the await, we just have to put it inside of an anonymous async function like this. So we'll do that, and we will console.log it. Okay, so never, we will just leave that. Oh, that's why. Okay. And then what we'll do is we will basically import this into our index page. So I'll basically be like import from /myAsyncComponent.view.
The dangling or the forgotten semicolon before iffy is like a very good reason why semicolons save lives.
Yeah, we can agree to disagree on that one, but
no, I mean, forgetting it, right? Because if you have optional semicolons, and then it's just so easy to,
yeah, because it thinks I'm trying to apply this whole thing as like an argument, Yeah.
I lost a half day because I was using the string template literals once to define a concatenated value, but I left off the semicolon. And so, but because it can take an input as string template literals, it was throwing an error. And then after that, I switched to prettier and never went back.
Yeah, I love prettier so much. Yeah. I wonder.
So is the ref with Vue, is that similar to like the actual ref from React, like the use ref?
Yeah, well, basically this is equivalent to saying, basically like saying like const data1 equals, it's basically this in React.
Well, so that would re-render, the value would get reset on each render in React, whereas ref is persistent between renders. So that's why I was kind of wondering if ref is persistent between DOM refreshes.
Got it. It is and it is and it isn't. So basically, like anytime views change detection logic is like a little bit different than React's. But basically, what this is saying is like make a single like reactive value, and yeah, anytime that changes, it'll re-render. But like if you were to say change something else, like if we had like const other and this was something, if we changed other, the value of data would still be the same. So it's like yeah, the best way I can describe it is that like instead of being like a pure render pattern, Vue uses more of like reactive, and the changes to reactive values are what like trigger a re-render, but the other ones are still preserved like in between.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's see if this works. I'm gonna do that and import this into here. And let's see what happens if I try to render this. We'll do that.
A user asks if we'll be using GraphQL CodeGen as one of the options.
Yeah, so that is actually set up. So we have the Vue Apollo composition API that's been generated, and that is using that's used here. So this Vue Apollo composition API generated. I renamed it because it appends subscription to it, but this is where the data in the second example comes from. So yeah, it's a super solid tool, and all of the data that you see here in the second example is loaded using this plugin for GraphQL code generator. Yeah, I really like it, and then of course the benefit of that is that when you look at the data, it's strongly typed. So basically, if we were to go to like second data dot value dot user, and we'll get like the 0th user, then you can see that we have access to like only what we selected, which is like the ID and the email, and these are like strongly typed. So it's pretty cool. Super big fan. You also get that with this up here, which is using their like type document node generator that's newer. So this is going to be type document node, and yeah, this one is really cool because basically what it does is it generates a TypeScript index signature. So if we go to the type definition, that is not what I wanted to do. Here, there's basically what it does is it maps overloads of like GQL to verbatim queries. And so when you pass in your GQL string to the GQL function, it'll return you the right overload for that operation. And this is all generated. The maintainer of Yarn, the package manager, actually kind of thought up this approach of using like verbatim string overloads to match it to like the right generated types, which is pretty cool. But yeah, those are like the both two GraphQL code gen approaches that are used here in the Apollo Vue component. But yeah, let's see if we can get this async stuff to work. So I have my async component, and it does render, but we didn't put anything in it. And so in our template, let's just put like do like a UL, and then like an LI with a v4. User and call it data. And then we can just be like ID. And we will just tell it that it's okay. Okay. So that's going to be hard to see. Pull it back over here. Yeah, it doesn't appear to be rendering. It definitely has the data. Let me log it out. So result is result.data.user. Okay, that's the problem. Okay, and then there we go. So we have 1, 2, 3 there. We will also go with the BR. We'll do user email. Okay, so that works. And basically what we're going to try to do, if I can get this to behave, is we'll do a suspense wrapper around it. And that will sort of automatically handle the loading state for us. So we need to take this suspense, and we need to put that in the wrapping component in the parent. So we'll put this down here. I'm going to format the document. And we're going to render my async component in the default. And in the fallback, we'll just have loading. So let's see if that works. I think it does, but it loads so fast that we can't see it. So let's go put a sleep in there. Let's see, we got to do we'll await a new promise, and we basically want to sleep, set timeout, resolve after 5,000 milliseconds. Okay, I think that should work. And we'll just to log that, we'll be like console.log, beginning to wait for promise. And then we'll be like, we'll log it here. So we'll say console.log resolving promise. Okay. So let's do that. And then let's look at what happens. Beginning to wait for promise, resolving promise. Okay. I don't know why we're not getting the fallback. Let me try to convert this into a default component. So we'll basically say, oh wait, this is the wrong one. And we'll do an async setup. Okay. And then we can do all this stuff here. And we'll just copy the ref. And we will then return data. There we go. So we get loading, beginning to wait for promise, and then it resolves. So yeah, it's something weird with the script setup. It's supposed to be, if you have any, I think if you have like a direct async data, it's supposed to convert it, but I was not able to get that syntax right. But you basically can see that we can basically just say that the data a component needs is async and declare like an async setup. And then in any parent component that renders this, that's super helpful because we get this fallback state. So we don't need to track like, send the AJAX request, set the component is loading. When the data comes back, then set the component is not loading. The resolution of the actual like setup function when it hits the return statement is when it will transition from the fallback to the default state. So pretty useful. Again, like React has this. I'm pretty sure. I don't know that I've seen a bunch of. I don't know that I've actually seen that many code bases that use it, but I'm pretty sure they just lifted it from React. So super useful. Then yeah, I think that mostly takes up the stuff that I wanted to cover today. Hopefully that was useful, and if we have any questions, we can maybe take those.
Yeah, we had a couple of people that were wondering about, I think maybe they joined later on, wondering why not use just Apollo, Urkel, or Villas, I guess is another library, directly.
Yes, yeah. So in this example, we do have that set up, all of those. So here's Apollo, here's Urkel, here's Villas, as well as like GraphQL Zeus. So we can basically just hit the endpoints. The data on this page is fetched by Villas. The data on the Urkel page is fetched by Urkel. The data on the fetch page is fetched by fetch. And then the data on the Zeus page is fetched by Zeus.
I think the reason why, I think maybe what the point that was missed was just that, like, it's just showing another way to do it if you wanted to do this sort of on your own or roll it by hand. So there are definitely cases if you're going to be doing a lot of fetching where it makes sense to be doing like a framework or a library. In some cases, if it's super lightweight and you just don't want to add an extra dependency to your project, then you don't need to if you can just kind of write out one or two components. So the solution here towards the end was just showing another alternative to using these frameworks.
You could totally do like instead of doing this fetch, you could do like use query, pull that from Apollo or from Urkel, and then put the arguments in here. So we could put the query here. I think this might need a type document node. I'm unsure. And now we can totally do that. And then we can be like, that's blah, 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 data, error. It's going to conflict. We'll get rid of that. The only thing is that this isn't async. So we couldn't have used this, but I'm pretty sure that we could have used like Apollo's, like Apollo.grade, doesn't matter. But anyways, yeah, that's the point.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, the user also mentioned that they came late to the stream. Is this code going to be on GitHub? Do you have this uploaded somewhere? Or
yeah, I do. So this one is going to be at basically here. So it's Gavin Ray and then 97 and then like viewconf London, and so all this code will go in here.
Which, to be honest, you could come up with a better name for that. I mean, master example, or not master example, but apologies. I'm working on it. Canonical example of GraphQL fetching in Vue.
Yeah, that's a good point. I probably should republish this because I think it's the only repo I've seen that like walks through integrating like every single library. Well, I'm sure there's ones that I don't know about, but the popular common choices in Vue for fetching data, and shows how to hook them up in Vue 3 and your like register them in your main app, and also how to use them in your components. And it has like code gen and stuff built into it, so it's all like strongly typed. But yeah, it's a good suggestion.
Yeah, it's really a powerful feature there. Our like helpful reference. That we probably have time for one very last minute question if anybody had a question, but I think that probably takes us up to the end here. We'll give it 30 seconds here for any last minute question. But yeah, so one of the things that I like when I look at Vue is that it seems like it looks more familiar in terms of writing JavaScript like proper than React does. React is kind of like this mixture, right, between writing HTML in a JavaScript, or writing JavaScript in an HTML way.
Right.
And I think that what's nice about Vue is that there's a lot of pieces that look a little more familiar from somebody who's maybe not used to that paradigm. But yeah, what's your take? Like, what if you were to say what draws you to? Because you kind of have a good overview of a lot of the frameworks. What draws you to Vue for your reference apps?
Yeah, so I mean, writing Vue, I like started with jQuery and like ASP.NET way back in the day, and like embedded Razor views, yada yada. I've written a bunch of stuff. I wrote React before before Redux, when the API was like React.create class. There was no state management. None of that existed. You just use like raw flux patterns. Anyways, I've written pretty much everything, but Vue was the first time. It was right after Vue 2 was released. Vue was the first time that I ever wrote a web app and was like, wow, like I'm having fun. Like this feels super, super easy and like natural. And it was really productive. And I think what's kept me is that it feels like I didn't think it was possible to improve on Vue 2. I was like, this is as good as it can get. And the Vue 3, they took lessons from like React with like hooks. They've taken lessons from Svelte with the script setup API. And Vue is also the only framework that allows you, the only major framework, I should say, that allows you to arbitrarily mix the Vue single file components and JSX and TSX components. Because I don't like to do everything in like these Vue files. Sometimes I just want to have a function that's like a component, and I want to put a bunch of them there, and they want to just take like a props, like just like React. It looks almost identical in Vue 3, the JSX and TSX. So it's really cool to be able to mix that. I think Svelte is awesome too. If you look at script setup and Svelte versus Vue, they are so similar. Basically, the only difference is whether you're whether these directives, like if and else if, whether they're part of the HTML elements themselves, or whether they go outside of this. So we could do like each thing is things in Svelte, and you close it off with /each, and in here you would put like p and then thing.name. In Vue, this would just be if you wanted a no component, you could nest a template inside this, and DV for thing in things. And so that's really the only difference. I mean, yeah, I could probably ramble on and on, but yeah, it's just a really great and productive framework. It allows you to write in a bunch of different styles. And I think that, the Vue core team really tries to take lessons and improve from other frameworks. And it's not kind of a my way or the highway, or like not invented here kind of syndrome. So
yeah, I wonder if that'll be difficult for familiar patterns. It's like in React, there's kind of a best practice emerging in React projects. So if I come into somebody's React project that I didn't write and it's relatively recent, like I'll kind of know how they structured their project. I wonder if that will be difficult with Vue to sort of come across a faster onboarding process, or a kind of a standardized way to make it scale to teams. But I'm just kind of curious
No, that's honestly a real thing. So, I mean, even now, a lot of folks haven't made the transition from Vue 2 to Vue 3 yet, or they like aren't particularly inspired to, or more realistically, like you have current existing or legacy apps that you have to maintain. So not only are now you have the old Vue 2 API and the new Vue 3 composition API, you can mix and match like Vue files and JSX. TSX, though people will look at you funny if they see JSX and TSX in your Vue project. It is not popular. I don't know anybody else that does it, but yeah, even between the two APIs, the major API changes, it's like a bit of you have to relearn it. It's a paradigm shift. So there's definitely less of that like one way to do everything and like convention over configuration, which I do think is like somewhat of a con.
When it looks like copy paste, even though you wrote it all yourself, it's like you got a salad of extensions here. We got one last question, and then I'm going to let you go because I know you're tight on your schedule here. We're going to have to take the first one there, just a fun one to end it with. Do you have any preference on .gql versus .graphql for file extensions?
Yeah, I used to use .gql when maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. It seems like that was the canonical extension. And then I don't know when it shifted, but nowadays I see like everybody using .graphql. It seems to be more prevalent in like modern code bases. So I've just shifted to renaming them like .graphql. I don't know. I might have had some in here. But yeah,
I think GraphQL still has an identity crisis, so it's just trying to go for the brand grab wherever it can.
Yeah.
But hey, that's gonna do it for our video this week. Really fun session. A lot of good stuff there. If Vue content is something you like, there's more to be said on this topic. So if it's something you'd like to see more of, let us know. We've got a pretty full slate coming up and through Christmas with some really fantastic guests. But if you'd like to see some more Vue content, we can definitely surface more of that in the coming year. I know React gets a lot of love in the Hazura community, but there's more frameworks than just React out there, and it's always good for us as developers to have as many tools in our toolkit as possible, such as writing GraphQL and TSX and JavaScript files in your same repo. So
they're like Pokemon. Yeah. The frameworks are like Pokemon. You got to catch them all, man.
Got to catch them all. And with that, we're going to do the last Pokemon reference, and that is we're going to Pokemon Go and call it a wrap on this session. So thanks for joining us today. We do these every week, 9 a.m. Pacific time, and we'll catch you in the next one.
All right. Bye. Thanks, everybody. Bye.